What's up, guys? So last video we talked about how to build a wide back by building your lats. So that leaves the question, well, how do I build thickness or build detail in my back? So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So let's talk about the muscles in your back that are going to add that thickness or the detail. So that's primarily going to be one, your trapezius. Now, the trapezius muscle or your traps, I think is a muscle that's really misunderstood because when most people think about traps, they just think about up top here above their shoulders. And when they think about exercises for the traps, they just think about doing shrugs. So let's take a minute and let's just talk about traps for a second. I've described it before, but a muscle is almost like a hydraulic. So think about like on a tractor or a big piece of machinery, a hydraulic shortens and then it lengthens. And that's going to pull that arm forward or back. And a muscle is the exact same way. So that's why it's important to know the direction of the muscle fibers and the direction of the pull, because that's going to give you a good idea of what that muscle does. So, for example, the upper or the superior portion of the traps, you can see the angle right there. It's going upward. So as this muscle shortens like this, well, then it's going to pull the scapula upward. The traps aren't just up here like I described. There's that superior portion up top, but then there's also a middle section called the medial portion and the inferior portion, which is down here, and that's the lower portion of the traps. So let's talk about the medial portion. The fibers on the medial portion run horizontal. So as they shorten, they're going to pull your scapula in, and that's going to give you what's called adduction of your scapula, and all that means is pulling your shoulder blades back together. Now remember that because that's really important. We're going to talk about that later, and that's a key part of learning how to target development in the middle of your back. So the inferior portion of your trapezius starts here and comes down to your spine like this. It's a triangle. And what those fibers do, you can see as they shorten, they're pulling down. So how do you pull your scapula down? Well, you can see if I'm standing here, I can't really pull my scapula down. Where that comes into play is when your arms are over your head, because as you lift your arms up, your scapula rotates upward, and your trapezius, the lower portion of your trapezius, is what's going to help initiate that movement and pulling down. So any of your pull down movements, say with a lat pull down, for example, that's going to go ahead and work that inferior portion. So even though on a lat pull down, we're primarily targeting our lats and building width, the good news is you're also going to be working that inferior portion of your traps. The way you're going to want to focus on that is initiating that movement with your scapula. You're going to want to feel your shoulder blades squeeze down. That's what I want to think about when I'm trying to engage the lower portion of the traps. So what about the middle portion? Well, it's going to be the same thing. So in any of our rows, you want to think about initiating that movement by pulling your shoulder blades back. Now, most people have a hard time feeling their traps or the middle portion of their traps because they try to go too heavy on their rowing movements. Whether it's a cable row or whether it's a dumbbell row or a bar row, if you go too heavy, you end up having to use too much of your arms to initiate that movement, and it makes it very difficult to squeeze your shoulder blades back. So that's why I like to drop down a little bit lighter and make sure that I really feel that squeeze in my back. So we're going to talk about some exercises real quick to go ahead and help you get that adduction in your scapula or squeeze your shoulder blades back. So the first one's going to be a row. Now last week we talked about doing a dumbbell row and keeping our elbow tight to our body and squeezing back to engage our lats. But if we want to work the middle portion of our traps and we want to get that thickness and the detail, we're going to do a different variation of a row. And what that's going to look like is elbows out and up. So instead of back, the elbows are coming out and you're squeezing up. The key to this is getting your shoulder blades to squeeze back. So don't think about initiating that movement with a pull with your arm. Think about first initiating that pull with your shoulder blades. You can see here how much movement I can get without ever bending my arm. So I want to see this first. So first it's a pull up, then continue the motion upwards. Now the exact same thing is going to apply with a bar row. Like we talked about in last week's video, if I want to engage my lats, I'm gonna go ahead and do an underhand grip like this. This is a supinated grip. And I'm gonna pull the bar towards my waist, keeping my elbows tight to my body. But if you want to build thickness in your back, you're gonna go ahead and go with a pronated grip, which is an overhand grip like this. And instead of pulling towards your waist, you're gonna pull a little bit higher. Now look at my elbows. See how my elbows are going out wide? But I want you to focus on the same thing. First, think about initiating that movement by squeezing your shoulder blades back. See how much the bar's moving without me bending my arms? All right, so shoulder blades back, then pull with the elbows. This way, I'm not using as much of my biceps because it's easy for the biceps to really take over in an exercise like this, and that's why a lot of people have a hard time feeling their back. So that's using a bar. Now you can also do the same thing with a cable. A lot of people do a seated cable row. If I were to pull low towards my hips, that's gonna target more of my lats. But if I come up high like this, toward the bottom of my chest, that's where I have that opportunity to engage more of my middle traps. So the same thing applies. First, pull back with your shoulder blades, then think about elbows. Never think about hands. If I think about hands, I'm gonna initiate the movement with my biceps. Don't wanna do that. So what else gives you that cool detail and thickness in your upper back? Well, two of the muscles that are gonna give you the appearance of a really detailed and built back aren't even back muscles at all. And that's gonna be your infraspinatus and your rear delts. So your infraspinatus attaches on the outside of the humerus right here and originates all along your scapula. And that's what's gonna give you that thickness and that detail in between your traps and your rear delts. Even though it's on the back, just like your rear delts are on the back, they're both shoulder muscles. So you're gonna train those during shoulder day. So I'm gonna show you a specific exercise to go ahead and target the infraspinatus. If you go back to our video on shoulder training, you'll see that I put a lot of emphasis on rear delts. But if you want a big, thick back, you gotta train rear delts. So the infraspinatus is also one of your rotator cuff muscles. So if you've ever seen someone do an exercise that looks like this, that's targeting your infraspinatus. So keeping my elbow close to my side, I'm gonna rotate outward, just like that. It's gonna pull the humerus back like that, or rotate it backwards. So this is an exercise that if you're trying to get a little more detail on your back, pay special attention to this on your shoulder day and add this into your routine. So what else have we left out? Well, that's gonna be the lower portion of your back. That's part of your spinal erectors, which is a series of muscles all along your back. But you gotta think of it this way, as the muscles run on each side of your spinal column like this, as they shorten, you can see that the muscle fibers are running vertically. So as they shorten, what is that gonna do? Well, that's extension of your back. So your abdominals are going to curl your spine forward, and your spinal erectors are going to straighten it. So how do we do that? Well, there's actually an exercise, it's just for that. Now I see people doing these two different ways. You'll see people come over here with their back straight, just like this, and they'll squeeze up. And you see how my back is staying relatively straight? If you do it that way, that's a hamstring exercise. You're using your hamstrings to pull yourself back up. We're not trying to target our hamstrings, so what we need to think about is curling underneath. So as you come down, instead of keeping your back straight, I want you to think about tucking your chin under. You should be looking backwards this way. You should see your feet, and then I want you to straighten it back up. Just like this, curl under, and straighten it back. Now, as you get stronger at these, that's when you can go ahead and you can put a plate on your chest and give yourself a little bit more resistance. Now, a lot of people will ask about different exercises to strengthen their back. For example, an exercise that a lot of people consider the king of back building is going to be your deadlift. And they'll do a deadlift from the floor. So it pulls straight up, just like this. Now, the problem is, you're using some of your back muscles, especially those spinal erectors, to keep your spine straight, to keep it stable, but that really becomes just an isometric contraction just to hold your spine in place. So it's not really good for actually getting a full range of motion, maximum contraction in that muscle. And a deadlift, despite what anyone says, is still primarily a lower body exercise. It's not an upper body exercise. So if you want to build detail and thickness in your back, focus on back specific exercises. The deadlift, although a great exercise, is a big compound movement that uses a lot of different muscles, and like I said, more of a focus on your lower body. So now if you guys tune in next week, I'm going to show you how to bring everything together, building both thickness and detail in your back along with width in your back with a complete workout that includes exercise selection, sets, and reps. So I'll see you guys next week.